The treatment room at Harmony Wellness Spa smelled like eucalyptus oil and lavender, a combination that Rachel Brown had learned to associate with healing more than any medical textbook ever had. She adjusted the temperature controls and checked the ambient lighting for the third time that morning, watching steam rise gently from the heated massage stones arranged on the warming tray. The soft instrumental music playing through hidden speakers created a cocoon of tranquility that seemed to exist outside the busy world beyond the spa's walls. Rachel had been working as a massage therapist for 8 years. Ever since a back injury had ended her dreams of becoming a professional dancer. What had started as physical therapy for her own recovery had evolved into a calling she'd never expected, helping others heal from trauma, pain, and stress that conventional medicine often struggled to address. Her 10 a.m. appointment was unusual, though she'd been seeing more non-human clients since the spa had started. Advertising interspecies wellness services 6 months ago, the intake form had been sparse. Zen Velthari, chronic muscle tension, prefers minimal verbal interaction. No medical history, no specific areas of concern, just a request for deep tissue work and a note that this was the client's first experience with human massage therapy. Rachel had learned not to make assumptions about alien physiology. The Zephyrian client she'd worked with last month had skin that changed temperature based on emotional state. The crystalline being from 2 weeks ago required special oils that wouldn't damage their mineral-based epidermis. Each species brought unique challenges that required patience, creativity, and a willingness to adapt techniques. She'd spent years perfecting. The soft chime of the appointment notification interrupted her preparations. Rachel smoothed her uniform tunic and headed to the reception area, where she found a figure sitting in perfect stillness by the fountain. Zen was tall, probably close to 7 feet, with skin that seemed to shimmer between deep blue and silver, depending on the angle of light. Their build was lean but muscular, suggesting someone who maintained physical fitness through deliberate practice rather than manual labor. But it was their posture that caught Rachel's attention. Zen sat with a kind of rigid control that she recognized from clients who carried deep trauma. Their shoulders were held just slightly too high. Their breathing was carefully measured, and their hands rested in their lap with the precise placement of someone who was consciously managing every aspect of their physical presence. Zen, Rachel, approached with the gentle confidence she'd developed for working with nervous first-time clients. "I'm Rachel. Thank you for choosing Harmony Wellness." Zen looked up, and Rachel found herself looking into eyes that were the color of deep ocean water. There was something ancient in that gaze, but also something carefully guarded, like someone who had learned not to expect comfort from physical contact. "Rachel Brown," Zen said, their voice carrying harmonics that made the words seem to resonate in the air. "I have read your credentials. You specialize in trauma-informed bodywork." "I do. It's an approach that recognizes how emotional experiences can be stored in physical tension and pain." Rachel gestured toward the treatment wing. "Shall we get started? I'd like to talk through your intake form and discuss what you're hoping to accomplish today." They walked to the treatment room in comfortable silence. Rachel noticed that Zen moved with an almost supernatural grace, but there was something mechanical about it, like someone who had trained themselves to control every gesture with conscious effort. "Before we begin," Rachel said, settling into the consultation chair, while Zen remained standing, "can you tell me about your experience with massage or bodywork? I know this is your first time working with a human therapist." Zen was quiet for a long moment, their ocean-colored eyes studying Rachel's face with an intensity that felt like being evaluated. "My species does not typically engage in therapeutic touch. Physical contact is considered problematic for reasons that are difficult to explain in human terms." "Problematic how?" "We are empathic beings. Physical contact creates involuntary, emotional connections that can be overwhelming and intrusive. Most of my people avoid unnecessary touch to maintain psychological boundaries." Rachel nodded, though this information raised several questions about why Zen had sought out massage therapy. "And yet you're here. What made you decide to try this approach?" Zen's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "I have been experiencing what your medical professionals would call chronic muscle tension and pain. Traditional Velthari healing methods have proven insufficient. A colleague suggested that human massage therapy might offer alternative approaches to addressing physical symptoms. When you say traditional methods have been insufficient, what have you tried? Meditation, energy work, pharmaceutical interventions. We focus primarily on mental techniques for managing physical discomfort. The concept of healing through direct physical manipulation is foreign to our healing traditions. Rachel was beginning to understand the complexity of what she was dealing with. Zen belonged to a species that avoided touch, had no cultural framework for massage therapy, and was seeking help for chronic pain that their own medical system couldn't address. It was like being asked to teach someone to swim when they'd never seen water before. Zen, I want to make sure you're comfortable throughout this process. Since physical contact is challenging for your species, we can start very slowly and build up gradually. You have complete control. If anything feels uncomfortable or overwhelming, just say so and we'll stop immediately. That is ... appreciated. Zen seemed surprised by the offer of control. What does the process typically involve? Rachel explained her standard approach to first session's assessment of problem areas, discussion of pressure preferences, and gradual introduction to different massage techniques. But as she talked, she found herself modifying her usual protocols based on what Zen had told her about empathic sensitivity. Since touch creates emotional connections for your species, I'm wondering if that might actually be part of what could help with healing, Rachel said. Sometimes physical tension is connected to emotional stress, but we'll go very slowly and see how you respond. Zen considered this. The emotional connections created by touch are typically involuntary and uncontrolled. How would you prevent overwhelming psychic spillover? Well, I'm not empathic, so I'm not sure there would be spillover in the way you're concerned about. But I can focus on maintaining clear professional boundaries and keeping my own emotional state calm and centered. Would that help? It might. Zen paused. I should mention that I have not experienced healing touch in many years. My last attempts at receiving bodywork ended poorly. Rachel recognized the careful phrasing of someone describing trauma without wanting to relive it. Can you tell me what happened? I want to make sure we avoid anything that might trigger negative associations. Zen was quiet for several minutes, their breathing carefully controlled. The practitioner did not understand Velthari physiology or our empathic nature. The experience was physically painful and emotionally invasive. I have avoided therapeutic touch since then. How long ago was that? 17 years. Rachel felt her heart clench. 17 years of chronic pain because a bad experience had made healing touch feel unsafe. It was the kind of situation that made her understand why she'd been drawn to trauma-informed bodywork in the first place. Zen, I'm sorry that happened to you. No one should have to endure pain for years because of one practitioner's lack of understanding. Rachel leaned forward slightly. Here's what I'd like to propose. We start with you fully clothed, and I'll just place my hands on your shoulders or back. No pressure, no movement, just contact. We'll see how that feels for both of us before we try anything more intensive. You would be willing to modify your standard procedures? My standard procedure is to do whatever helps my clients heal safely and comfortably. If that means inventing completely new approaches for your species, then that's what we'll do. For the first time since Zen had entered the spa, their rigid posture relaxed slightly. That is not what I expected from human healthcare. What did you expect? Protocols that prioritize efficiency over individual needs. Treatments that assume all beings respond the same way to standardized approaches. Rachel smiled. You've clearly been dealing with the wrong humans. Real healing happens when we meet people where they are, not where we think they should be. Zen studied Rachel's face again, and this time there seemed to be hope mixed with the caution. Very well. I am willing to attempt your modified approach. As Rachel prepared the treatment table with extra cushioning and adjusted the room temperature, based on Zen's preferences, she found herself thinking about the trust implicit in what was about to happen. This being had avoided healing touch for 17 years, and they were willing to try again because Rachel had offered to approach their needs with patience and respect. Before we start, Rachel said, as Zen settled onto the treatment table, I want you to know that healing isn't just about fixing what's wrong. Sometimes it's about rediscovering what's possible. Zen looked up at her with those deep ocean eyes. What do you mean? I mean that you've been carrying pain for 17 years, but you're here now. That tells me you haven't given up on the possibility that things can be better. I had not considered it in those terms, Zen said quietly. I thought I was simply seeking pain management. Sometimes pain management and hope look very similar, Rachel replied, placing her hands gently on Zen's shoulders. Let's see what we can discover together. The moment Rachel's hands made contact with Zen's shoulders, she knew this was unlike any massage session she'd ever experienced. Through the fabric of Zen's tunic, she could feel muscle tension so profound it was like touching stone. But there was something else, a subtle vibration, almost like a low-frequency hum that seemed to resonate through her palms. How does that feel? Rachel asked, keeping her hands completely still. Zen was quiet for a long moment, their breathing carefully controlled. Strange. I can sense your emotional state through the contact, but it is peaceful, not intrusive as I expected. What am I feeling right now? Focused concentration, professional concern, and something I do not have words for in my language. A genuine desire to help without personal agenda. Rachel was fascinated. You can read all that through simple touch? Empathic contact is involuntary for my species. Usually it creates overwhelming floods of emotion from the other person. But your emotional signature is remarkably clear and controlled. As Rachel maintained gentle contact, she began to understand what Zen meant about emotional spillover. She could feel something flowing between them, not thoughts exactly, but a sense of Zen's emotional state. There was pain there, yes, but also something deeper, fear, loneliness, and underneath it all, a profound exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. Zen, Rachel said gently, I'm going to try adding very slight pressure. If it becomes uncomfortable in any way, tell me immediately. She began with the lightest possible touch, barely applying pressure, just allowing her hands to register the landscape of tension beneath them. What she found was unlike anything in her training. Zen's muscle tension wasn't distributed in normal patterns. Instead of tight spots here and there, it was like their entire body had been turned into a defensive shield, every muscle group locked in protective spasm. This level of muscular holding, Rachel said, it must be exhausting to maintain. It has become automatic. I no longer consciously control it. How long have you been carrying tension like this? Zen was quiet for several minutes. Through her hands, Rachel could feel them processing the question, could sense emotional walls being carefully negotiated. Since the incident I mentioned, perhaps longer. Rachel continued her gentle exploration, mapping the areas of greatest tension. Zen's neck and shoulders were locked solid. Their back muscles were rigid from the base of their skull to their tailbone, and even their arms carried defensive tension. Zen, what I'm feeling suggests this isn't just physical muscle tension. This feels like your entire body has been organized around protecting you from something. That is an accurate assessment. Through the empathic connection, Rachel could sense Zen's internal struggle wanting to explain, but being held back by ingrained caution. She'd worked with enough trauma survivors to recognize the pattern. You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share, Rachel said, but I want you to know that what I'm feeling through my hands tells a story. Your body has been working very hard to keep you safe. Safe from what? I can't know that without you telling me. But bodies don't create this level of protective tension without reason. Rachel continued her gentle assessment, noting areas where the muscle tension seemed particularly intense. There were specific trigger points along Zen's spine that felt almost crystallized with stress, and their shoulder blades were locked in a position that suggested someone who had spent years bracing for impact. The practitioner who worked on you 17 years ago, Rachel said carefully, did they understand that your species' experiences touch differently? No. They treated me as if I were human. When I tried to explain the empathic complications, they dismissed my concerns as psychological resistance to treatment. What happened? Zen's muscle tension increased noticeably under Rachel's hands. They used deep pressure techniques without preparation or gradual introduction. The physical pain was significant, but the empathic overload was traumatic. Experienced not only their impatience and frustration with my difficult responses, but also their emotional disconnection from my well-being. Rachel felt a surge of anger on Zen's behalf, but she carefully controlled her emotional response, knowing it would be transmitted through their empathic connection. That sounds terrible. No one should have to endure treatment that re-traumatizes them. The experience confirmed what I had been taught, that seeking healing touch from other species was dangerous and ultimately harmful. What had you been taught? Through their empathic connection, Rachel could sense Zen weighing how much to reveal. Finally, they spoke with careful precision. My species values emotional autonomy and psychic boundaries. We are taught that empathic entanglement with other beings leads to loss of self and psychological contamination. Contamination? Exposure to emotional states, thought patterns, or psychological frameworks that are incompatible with optimal Valthari mental health. Rachel was beginning to understand the cultural context that made Zen's presence here even more remarkable. They weren't just seeking help for physical pain, they were defying their entire species' approach to emotional and physical well-being. So, by coming here, you're not just trying an alternative therapy. You're going against everything your culture has taught you about safe healing practices. Yes, that must have been a difficult decision. It was necessary. The pain has become unmanageable, and traditional Valthari approaches focus exclusively on mental transcendence of physical discomfort. They do not address the underlying muscular holding patterns. As Rachel continued her gentle work, she became aware that something unusual was happening. The empathic connection that had initially felt like a one-way flow of information was becoming bidirectional. She could sense Zen's emotional state, but she was also becoming aware that her own calm, focused presence was having an effect on their nervous system. Zen, something interesting is happening. Can you feel how my emotional state is affecting your muscle tension? Yes, your calmness is ... contagious. My automatic defensive responses are beginning to relax. In trauma-informed bodywork, we call that co-regulation. When two nervous systems sync up, the calmer one can help the more activated one find balance. This is possible between different species? Apparently so. Your empathic abilities might actually make this process more effective than it would be with human clients. Rachel could feel Zen processing this information, could sense their surprise at the idea that their empathic nature might be an advantage rather than a complication. Previous practitioners saw my empathic responses as problematic, Zen said. You see them as useful? I see them as part of who you are. Instead of fighting against your natural abilities, we can work with them. For the first time since the session had begun, Rachel felt Zen's defensive tension decrease noticeably. It was like watching ice begin to melt. The rigid protective holding patterns started to soften around the edges. That feels different, Zen said, their voice carrying a note of wonder. How different? For the first time in many years, my body feels like it might be safe to relax. Rachel continued her gentle work, gradually increasing pressure as Zen's nervous system adapted to the experience of healing touch. But as the session progressed, she became aware of something that concerned her. The areas of greatest tension weren't just muscular. They seemed to be organized around specific emotional memories. When she worked on certain trigger points, she could feel Zen's emotional state shift dramatically, as if touching particular muscles was accessing stored trauma. Zen, I'm noticing that certain areas seem to hold more than just physical tension. Are you aware of emotional responses connected to specific parts of your body? Yes, the incident 17 years ago was not the only traumatic experience involving unwanted touch. Rachel's hands stilled. Can you tell me more about that? Through their empathic connection, she could feel Zen's internal struggle intensifying. Fear, shame, and something that felt like old grief were mixing with their current experience of relaxation and safety. On my world, physical contact without consent is sometimes used as a form of psychological manipulation. Those with strong empathic abilities can be exploited through forced emotional entanglement. Rachel felt her chest tighten with understanding. Someone hurt you using your empathic abilities against you. Several someones. Over a period of years. It is why I left my homeworld, and why I've avoided healing touch ever since. A weight of what Zen was sharing settled over Rachel like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just chronic muscle tension. This was a body that had been organizing itself around survival for decades. Zen, I'm honored that you trust me enough to share that. And I want you to know that what we're doing here is completely within your control. Your body is responding because you're choosing to let it respond. This is very different from my previous experiences. How so? You ask permission. You explain what you're doing. You respond when I express discomfort. These seem like obvious practices, but they were not part of my previous encounters with healing touch. Rachel realized they had reached a crucial point in the session. Zen's body was beginning to release years of protective tension, but that release was bringing up emotional material that needed careful handling. We can stop here if you'd like, Rachel offered. Sometimes the first session is about establishing safety rather than addressing all the tension at once. I would like to continue, if possible. This is the first time in many years that my body has felt hopeful. Hopeful? As if healing might actually be possible rather than just fantasy. Rachel resumed her gentle work, but now she was operating on multiple levels, addressing physical tension, while also being mindful of the emotional trauma that was stored in Zen's muscle memory. It was the most complex and delicate therapeutic work she'd ever undertaken. Zen, she said as she worked on a particularly tense area along their spine, what would it mean for you if this pain could actually be healed? I had not allowed myself to consider that possibility. Consider it now. Through their empathic connection, Rachel could feel Zen's emotional landscape shifting. The rigid control they maintained was giving way to something softer, more vulnerable, but also more authentic. It would mean I could stop using all my energy to manage pain and use it for living instead, Zen said quietly. What would you want to do with that energy? I do not know. I have forgotten what it feels like to have energy for anything beyond survival. As the session continued, Rachel realized they were doing more than addressing muscle tension. They were beginning to heal patterns of trauma that had shaped Zen's entire approach to existing in the world. And in the process, she was learning things about empathic healing that no human practitioner had ever discovered. Over the next hour, Rachel and Zen developed a communication system unlike anything she'd experienced in 8 years of practice. Through the empathic connection, Zen could convey exactly how each technique felt, not just physically, but emotionally and energetically. Rachel learned to read the subtle changes in their emotional state that indicated when a particular area needed more gentle approach or when it was safe to apply deeper pressure. This is remarkable, Rachel said, as she worked on a cluster of tension points along Zen's left shoulder blade. You can give me real-time feedback about what's happening in your nervous system. Is this not normal for human massage therapy? Humans can tell me if pressure is too light or too strong, but they can't usually describe exactly how their nervous system is responding to treatment. You're giving me information that would normally take multiple sessions to discover. As Rachel continued her work, she began to understand the sophisticated way that Zen species processed physical and emotional information. The empathic connection wasn't just about reading emotions. It was a comprehensive data stream that included nervous system state, muscular response, and even energetic patterns that Rachel was only beginning to recognize. Zen, can you teach me what you're sensing? I want to understand how to work more effectively with your physiology. What would you like to know? When I work on this area, Rachel applied gentle pressure to a tight spot near Zen's neck. What information are you receiving? Physical pressure, obviously, but also your intention. You are seeking to release tension without causing harm. I can sense the specific quality of your attention, which affects how my nervous system responds to your touch. The quality of my attention affects your physical response. For empathic beings, the emotional and intentional state of a practitioner is as important as their technical skill. Previous practitioners approached my body as a problem to be solved rather than a being to be helped. Rachel paused in her work, considering this. So the way I think about what I'm doing changes how effective it is? Precisely. When you approach a tense muscle with curiosity and compassion, my nervous system recognizes that and allows relaxation. When someone approaches with impatience or clinical detachment, my body automatically increases defensive tension. That's incredible. You're essentially saying that the therapeutic relationship is as important as the technique. For my species, they are inseparable. As the session progressed, Rachel found herself learning an entirely new approach to bodywork. Instead of simply applying techniques she'd been trained in, she was co-creating a healing experience with Zen's empathic feedback. When she worked on particularly tense areas, Zen could guide her to the exact pressure and movement that would most effectively release the holding patterns. This muscle group, Rachel said, working on Zen's mid-back, feels like it's been locked in place for years. It has. That area holds tension related to hypervigilance, constantly scanning for potential threats. And how does it feel to have someone working on it with gentleness instead of force? Through their empathic connection, Rachel could sense Zen's surprise at the question. I had not realized how much energy I was spending on hypervigilance until it began to relax. It feels like like I can finally stop watching for danger. As the protective tension in Zen's body began to release, Rachel became aware of something remarkable happening. Areas of chronic pain that had been locked for years were beginning to soften, but more than that, Zen's entire emotional state was shifting. Rachel, Zen said, after a particularly effective release in their lower back, I need to tell you something about what is happening. What's that? As the physical tension releases, I am accessing emotional states I have not experienced in decades. Joy, curiosity, hope. It is as if these feelings were trapped beneath the muscular holding patterns. Rachel had seen this phenomenon in human clients' emotional releases that accompanied physical healing, but never with this level of clarity and precision. How does it feel to access those emotions again? Frightening, wonderful, overwhelming. Zen paused. I had forgotten that I was capable of feeling joy. When was the last time you remember feeling genuinely joyful? Before the incidents that made touch feel dangerous. Perhaps 20 years ago. Rachel felt her eyes fill with tears at the weight of what Zen was sharing. 20 years of existing without access to joy because trauma had locked it away in their body. Zen, what you're experiencing right now, this is what healing can look like. Not just managing pain, but rediscovering parts of yourself that trauma made inaccessible. Is this normal for human healing practices? It's possible, but it usually takes many sessions and a lot of trust building. Your empathic abilities are allowing us to work much more efficiently. As Rachel continued her work, she realized that something extraordinary was happening for her as well. Through the empathic connection, she was experiencing Zen's healing process from the inside. She could feel what it was like for chronically tense muscles to finally relax, could sense the emotional relief that came with releasing trauma-based holding patterns. Zen, can I ask you something? What am I learning about healing through our empathic connection? You are experiencing what it feels like to heal from trauma that has been stored in the body for decades. Most practitioners never receive this kind of feedback about the effectiveness of their work. It's changing how I understand my job, Rachel realized. I've always focused on technique and anatomy, but feeling the healing process from your perspective is teaching me that the emotional and energetic aspects are just as important. This is why empathic healing is so powerful, but also why it was forbidden on my world. The level of connection required makes both parties vulnerable. Vulnerable how? You are learning to sense trauma in ways that human practitioners typically cannot. I am learning to trust healing touch in ways that my species considers dangerous. We are both changed by this process. Rachel understood what Zen meant. She could feel her own approach to bodywork evolving in real time. The empathic feedback was teaching her to read clients' nervous systems in ways that years of training had never provided. Is that why your people avoid healing touch with other species? Because it creates genuine connection? Partially. But also because most other species do not approach healing with the level of emotional awareness that you are demonstrating. Connection without wisdom can be harmful. What do you mean? Many practitioners focus only on physical symptoms without understanding how emotional trauma creates muscular tension. They apply force to areas that need gentleness, or they rush processes that require patience. As the session moved into its final phase, Rachel worked on what seemed to be the deepest layer of Zen's defensive tension, a pattern of muscular holding that ran along their entire spine like armor. This feels like the core protective pattern, Rachel observed, like your body built a fortress around your spine to keep you safe. Yes, that pattern formed after the first traumatic incident. Every subsequent trauma reinforced it. And how does it feel to have someone working with it instead of against it? Like dismantling a prison I built to protect myself, but that ended up isolating me from all possibility of healing. As Rachel continued her gentle work on this core pattern, she could feel through their empathic connection that something profound was shifting for Zen. The rigid control they maintained over their emotional state was giving way to something more fluid and authentic. "Rachel," Zen said, their voice carrying new harmonics, "I need you to know that what is happening here is unprecedented for my species." "How so?" "We are taught that empathic connection with other beings inevitably leads to loss of self. But what I am experiencing is the opposite. I am rediscovering parts of myself that I had lost." "Maybe connection doesn't have to mean losing yourself," Rachel suggested. "Maybe it can mean finding yourself through relationship with others." "That concept is revolutionary for my people." "Revolutionary how?" "We approach healing as an individual process of mental transcendence over physical limitations. The idea that healing might require connection with others challenges fundamental assumptions about psychological safety and autonomy." As the session drew to a close, Rachel realized that they had accomplished something that went far beyond treating chronic muscle tension. They had demonstrated that empathic connection could enhance healing rather than complicate it, and that trauma stored in the body could be released through patient, respectful therapeutic touch. "Zen, how do you feel now compared to when we started?" "Different in ways I do not have words for. The chronic pain that has been my constant companion for years is significantly reduced. But more than that, I feel connected to my body in a way I had forgotten was possible." "Connected how?" "For years, I have existed primarily in my mind, using mental discipline to override physical discomfort. Now I can actually feel my body as a source of information and pleasure rather than just pain." Rachel began the process of gradually ending the session, allowing Zen time to integrate the changes that had occurred. "What we've done today," Rachel said, "it's just the beginning. Healing trauma that's been stored in the body for decades usually requires ongoing work. Would you be willing to continue working with me?" "I would be honored to. But I think what we've discovered here is bigger than just your individual healing process." "What do you mean?" "I mean that we've figured out how to combine human massage therapy with empathic healing in ways that are more effective than either approach alone. That could change how both our species approach therapeutic touch." Zen was quiet for a long moment, processing this possibility. "You believe other members of my species could benefit from this approach?" "I believe we've discovered something that could help anyone who has trauma stored in their body, human or otherwise." As Zen slowly sat up from the massage table, Rachel could see the transformation that had occurred. Their posture was more relaxed, their breathing was deeper, and there was something in their ocean-colored eyes that hadn't been there at the beginning of the session, a quality of aliveness and presence that spoke of genuine healing. "Rachel," Zen said, "thank you for seeing possibilities where I only saw problems. Thank you for trusting me enough to discover what those possibilities could become." 3 days later, Rachel received a call that would change everything. It was Dr. Sarah Martinez from the University Medical Center, and her voice carried the kind of urgency that suggested something significant had happened. "Rachel, I understand you've been working with a Velthari client named Zen. They've requested that you be present for a consultation we're conducting about interspecies therapeutic protocols." "A consultation?" "The Velthari embassy has sent a medical attached to investigate reports of successful trauma therapy using human massage techniques. Apparently, word has gotten out about your work with Zen." Rachel felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with excitement. "What kind of investigation?" "They want to understand how you achieved therapeutic results that traditional Velthari medicine hasn't been able to accomplish. Zen specifically requested that you be part of the discussion." The meeting was scheduled for the following morning at the medical center's interspecies health wing. Rachel arrived to find a conference room that felt more like a diplomatic summit than a medical consultation. There was Dr. Martinez, 2 human researchers she didn't recognize, Zen, and a Velthari being who radiated the kind of authority that suggested high rank within their species' medical hierarchy. "Rachel Brown," Dr. Martinez said, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Keth Vale Miran, Chief Medical Advisor to the Velthari Embassy." "Dr. Vale Miran, this is the massage therapist who has been working with Zen." Dr. Vale Miran was taller than Zen, with skin that shifted between deep purple and silver. Their presence felt almost overwhelming, not threatening, but incredibly intense, like being evaluated by someone who could see directly into your thoughts. Ms. Brown, Dr. Valmiron said, their voice carrying harmonics that made Rachel's bones vibrate slightly. Zen has made some remarkable claims about the effectiveness of your therapeutic interventions. I've been working with them to address chronic muscle tension and trauma-related holding patterns. Rachel replied carefully, yes, but according to Zen's reports, you have achieved results that our most advanced medical specialists have been unable to accomplish in decades of treatment. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Rachel, perhaps you could describe your approach for Dr. Valmiron. Rachel looked at Zen, who nodded encouragingly. Well, I use trauma-informed massage therapy, which focuses on creating safety and working collaboratively with the client's nervous system rather than forcing change. And how does this differ from standard human massage therapy? Dr. Valmiron asked. Standard massage often focuses on applying technique to address symptoms. Trauma-informed work recognizes that symptoms are often adaptive responses to threatening experiences. Instead of fighting those responses, we work with them. Zen has reported that you are able to access emotional trauma stored in muscular tension patterns. How is this possible? Rachel glanced at Zen again, uncertain how much to reveal about their empathic abilities. Zen spoke up. Dr. Valmiron, Rachel worked with my empathic responses rather than treating them as complications. The therapeutic connection allowed for precision that would be impossible with purely physical techniques. Dr. Valmiron's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise. You allowed empathic entanglement with a human practitioner? I allowed therapeutic connection that enhanced the healing process rather than compromising it. This is highly irregular. Empathic connection with other species is specifically contraindicated in our medical protocols. Dr. Martinez interjected. Dr. Valmiron, perhaps you could explain the medical reasoning behind that contraindication. Empathic connection with non-Valthari beings exposes our people to emotional and psychological patterns that can disrupt optimal mental functioning. It is considered a form of psychic contamination. Rachel felt a flash of indignation. With respect, Dr. Valmiron, what Zen and I discovered was exactly the opposite. The empathic connection made the healing process more effective and precise. You are not qualified to assess the psychological impact on Valthari mental health. No, but I am qualified to assess what happened during our therapeutic work, Rachel replied firmly. And what happened was healing, not contamination. Zen spoke up, their voice carrying new confidence. Dr. Valmiron, I have experienced both approaches. Traditional Valthari methods taught me to transcend physical pain through mental discipline, but they did not address the underlying trauma. Rachel's approach allowed me to actually heal the stored trauma. Stored trauma is not a recognized concept in Valthari medicine, Dr. Valmiron said dismissively. Perhaps that is why our traditional approaches have been insufficient, Zen replied quietly. The room fell silent. Rachel could feel the tension between the Valthari medical authority and Zen's newfound understanding of their own healing process. Dr. Martinez cleared her throat. Dr. Valmiron, we've documented significant physiological improvements in Zen's condition. Muscle tension patterns that were present for decades have shown measurable reduction. Chronic pain levels have decreased substantially. From a purely medical standpoint, the intervention has been highly successful. At what cost? Dr. Valmiron demanded. Empathic entanglement with alien consciousness compromises Valthari psychological integrity. How? Rachel asked bluntly. Dr. Valmiron looked at her with something approaching irritation. Exposure to non-Valthari emotional patterns creates dependency on external validation rather than internal self-regulation. With respect, Rachel said, that sounds like theory rather than observed reality. What I witnessed was Zen rediscovering their capacity for emotional self-regulation. You witnessed temporary symptom relief achieved through psychological dependence on interspecies connection. Rachel felt her professional composure slipping. Dr. Valmiron, have you ever actually worked with trauma survivors? Because what you're describing sounds like someone who's never seen the difference between healthy connection and codependency. The silence that followed was profound. Zen was staring at Dr. Valmiron with an expression that suggested they were processing something significant. Dr. Valmiron, Zen said slowly, May I ask about your personal experience with empathic healing? My personal experience is irrelevant. Medical protocols are based on research and established principles. But those principles assume that empathic connection is inherently harmful. What if that assumption is incorrect? It is not incorrect. It is established medical fact. Based on what evidence? Rachel asked. Dr. Velmeron's composure cracked slightly. Based on centuries of observation of individuals who engaged in inappropriate empathic entanglement. Inappropriate how? Exploitative relationships, psychological manipulation, loss of individual identity through absorption into alien consciousness, patterns. Rachel was beginning to understand. Dr. Velmeron, it sounds like your medical protocols are based on examples of empathic connection that was abusive or exploitative. But that doesn't mean all empathic connection is harmful. The risk is too great. The risk of what, exactly? Loss of psychological autonomy, contamination by alien emotional patterns, dependency on external validation rather than internal strength. Zen was quiet for a long moment and spoke with careful precision. Dr. Velmeron, those are the exact symptoms I experienced before beginning work with Rachel. Isolation from my own emotional responses. Rigid control that required constant internal management, inability to access natural healing processes. Those symptoms were protecting you from worse outcomes, were they? Because what I experienced through empathic healing was exactly the opposite of what you're describing. I rediscovered my capacity for emotional self-regulation. I learned to trust my body's natural healing responses. I became more myself, not less. Dr. Martinez had been taking notes throughout this exchange. Dr. Velmeron, what would it take to demonstrate that this approach could be beneficial for other Velthari individuals? It cannot be demonstrated because it is fundamentally flawed. But what if it could be? Dr. Velmeron was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling with concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about Velthari medical practice. Hypothetically, they said finally, evidence would require multiple successful cases with long-term follow-up showing no adverse psychological effects. And who would assess those psychological effects? Rachel asked. Qualified Velthari medical specialists, including specialists who understand trauma-informed healing. There are no Velthari specialists in trauma-informed healing because we do not recognize trauma as a treatable medical condition. Rachel stared at Dr. Velmeron. You don't recognize trauma as treatable? We recognize it as a challenge to be transcended through mental discipline and emotional regulation. What about when mental discipline and emotional regulation aren't sufficient? Then the individual has not achieved adequate mental strength. The room fell silent again. Rachel was beginning to understand why Zen had spent 17 years believing that their pain was somehow their fault. Dr. Velmeron, Rachel said carefully, what you're describing sounds like a medical system that blames patients when treatments don't work. I am describing a medical system that emphasizes personal responsibility and psychological strength at the expense of acknowledging that some problems require external support to solve. External support creates dependency, or it creates capacity for healing that wouldn't be possible in isolation. Zen had been listening to this exchange with growing intensity. Finally, they spoke. Dr. Velmeron, I have lived both approaches. 17 years of attempting to transcend trauma through mental discipline. One session of empathic healing that addressed the root causes. Which approach do you think was more effective? Your individual experience does not constitute medical evidence. Then what would? Dr. Velmeron was quiet for a long moment. Multiple cases, controlled conditions, long-term assessment, peer review by qualified medical authorities. And if such evidence demonstrated the effectiveness of empathic healing approaches, then our medical protocols would require ... revision. Rachel looked around the room, sensing that they had reached a critical juncture. Dr. Velmeron, would you be willing to observe additional sessions? Not to approve or disapprove, but to understand exactly what the process involves. For what purpose? So that you can make informed decisions about its potential benefits and risks, rather than decisions based on theoretical concerns. Dr. Velmeron considered this for several minutes. You would be willing to have your methods observed and evaluated? I would welcome it. Healing works best when it's based on evidence rather than assumptions. And you, then? You would be willing to have your healing process documented for potential medical review? Zen's response was immediate. If it means other members of my species could access healing that has been denied to them for centuries. Yes. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Dr. Vale Miran, the University Medical Center would be honored to host a formal research collaboration between human and Velthari medical specialists. What would such collaboration involve? Documentation of therapeutic methods, assessment of outcomes, development of protocols that combine the best of both approaches. Rachel felt a surge of excitement. Dr. Vale Miran, imagine if we could develop healing approaches that work with Velthari empathic abilities rather than against them. You believe this is possible? I believe we've already started to prove it's possible. 6 weeks later, the research collaboration had expanded beyond anything Rachel had imagined. The University Medical Center had established the first interspecies trauma healing institute, with Rachel serving as director of empathic bodywork and Dr. Vale Miran reluctantly agreeing to observe and document the therapeutic process. What had started as one Velthari client seeking relief from chronic pain had evolved into a groundbreaking study involving 12 Velthari volunteers who had been living with various forms of trauma-related physical symptoms. Each case was carefully documented, with before and after assessments conducted by both human and Velthari medical specialists. Rachel found herself working with a team that included Dr. Martinez, 2 other human massage therapists she was training in empathic techniques, and surprisingly, Dr. Vale Miran, who had begun developing assessment tools for measuring psychological and physiological changes in Velthari clients. The preliminary results are unprecedented, Dr. Martinez told Rachel, as they reviewed data from the first month of treatments. We're seeing average pain reduction of 67%, significant improvements in sleep quality, and measurable changes in stress hormone levels. What does Dr. Vale Miran think of the psychological assessments? That's the most interesting part. They're documenting improvements in emotional regulation, increased sense of personal agency, and enhanced capacity for healthy interpersonal connection. Rachel looked up from the client files she was reviewing. Those are exactly the opposite of the psychological contamination effects they were worried about. Exactly. Which is forcing some fundamental revisions in Velthari medical theory. The breakthrough case came in week 4 with a Velthari client named Kira, who had been suffering from what human doctors would recognize as complex PTSD. Like Zen, Kira had experienced traumatic empathic entanglement years earlier, but their symptoms were more severe complete emotional numbing, chronic pain throughout their body, and an inability to form meaningful connections with others. Kira presents the most challenging case yet, Rachel told Dr. Vale Miran before the session. Their nervous system is so dysregulated that they can't maintain empathic connection for more than a few minutes at a time. What approach will you use? We'll work in very short segments, allowing frequent breaks for integration. The goal isn't to push through their defenses, but to gradually demonstrate that empathic connection can be safe and healing. Dr. Vale Miran observed the entire 3-hour session, taking detailed notes on everything from Rachel's hand positioning to Kira's physiological responses. What they witnessed challenged everything they thought they knew about empathic healing. The precision is remarkable, Dr. Vale Miran murmured as Rachel worked with Kira's nervous system to gradually increase tolerance for therapeutic touch. You are able to maintain empathic connection without overwhelming their capacity for self-regulation. The key is following their lead, Rachel explained as she worked. Instead of imposing a treatment plan, I'm responding to what their system can handle moment by moment. Through the empathic connection, Rachel could sense that Kira's nervous system was beginning to recognize safety. Areas of chronic tension that had been locked for years were starting to soften, and more importantly, Kira was beginning to access emotional states they hadn't experienced in decades. I can feel hope, Kira said halfway through the session, their voice filled with wonder. I had forgotten that hope was possible. After the session, Dr. Vale Miran approached Rachel with an expression that mixed professional curiosity with something approaching awe. Ms. Brown, what I observed today contradicts fundamental assumptions about empathic healing that have guided Velthari medicine for centuries. How so? Our protocols assume that empathic connection inevitably leads to loss of individual psychological boundaries. But what I witnessed was the opposite. You used empathic connection to help Kira strengthen their emotional self-regulation. That's because empathic connection doesn't have to be overwhelming or invasive. When it's approached with respect and skill, it can actually enhance individual autonomy. Dr. Vale Miran was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing implications that extended far beyond individual healing. If your methods prove effective across multiple cases, it would require fundamental revision of our entire approach to trauma healing. Is that necessarily a bad thing? It would mean acknowledging that our medical system has been incomplete in its understanding of healing processes. Dr. Vale Miran, medical systems evolve when new evidence challenges old assumptions. That's how healing advances. The formal presentation of their findings took place 3 months later, with representatives from both human and Velthari medical establishments in attendance. Rachel found herself standing before an audience of some of the most distinguished medical minds from both species, presenting research that could transform how trauma was understood and treated. "What we've discovered," Rachel said, gesturing to the comprehensive data they'd compiled, "is that empathic abilities, when properly understood and skillfully utilized, can enhance healing rather than complicate it." She presented case after case showing dramatic improvements in both physical and psychological symptoms, chronic pain reductions averaging 72%, sleep quality improvements of 85%, and most significantly, measures of emotional well-being and interpersonal connection that showed sustained improvement months after treatment. "The key insight," Rachel continued, "is that trauma often involves disconnection from the body, from emotions, from others. Empathic healing works by gradually re-establishing those connections in ways that feel safe and empowering." Dr. Vale Miran stood to present the psychological assessments from the Velthari perspective. Their presentation was cautious but groundbreaking. Contrary to our initial concerns about psychological contamination, what we observed was enhanced psychological integration. Clients demonstrated increased emotional self-regulation, improved sense of personal agency, and greater capacity for healthy interpersonal relationships. The questions from the audience were intense and sometimes skeptical, but the data was compelling. Most importantly, 12 Velthari individuals who had been living with chronic pain and trauma-related symptoms for years or decades were now experiencing levels of well-being they hadn't thought possible. "Dr. Brown," asked Dr. Harrison, a prominent human trauma specialist, "what do you see as the broader implications of this work?" "I see the potential for healing approaches that work with individuals' natural abilities rather than against them. For Velthari people, that means utilizing empathic sensitivity as a healing resource. For humans, it might mean recognizing that our own emotional and social connections are just as important for healing as medical techniques." "And Dr. Vale Miran," asked Dr. Harrison, "how do you see this changing Velthari medical practice?" Dr. Vale Miran was quiet for a moment before responding. "It requires us to acknowledge that isolation and individual transcendence may not be the optimal approaches to healing trauma. That connection, when skillfully facilitated, can enhance rather than compromise psychological well-being." After the presentation, Rachel found herself surrounded by medical professionals from multiple species, wanting to understand how they could implement similar approaches in their own practices. But the most meaningful moment came when Zen approached her with a request that would change her life. "Rachel," Zen said, "the Velthari Embassy has authorized the establishment of the first Interspecies Empathic Healing Center. They would like you to serve as director. A center dedicated to empathic healing, a center dedicated to developing healing approaches that honor the unique abilities of different species, while creating genuine therapeutic connection." Rachel looked around the room at the assembled medical professionals, many of whom were already discussing collaboration opportunities and research partnerships. What would that involve? Training practitioners from multiple species in empathic healing techniques, developing protocols that can be adapted for different physiologies and cultural contexts, advancing the understanding of how connection enhances healing rather than complicating it. "And you would be part of this?" "I would be honored to serve as liaison between human and Velthari approaches. helping to bridge medical traditions that have been isolated for too long. 1 year later, Rachel stood in the main treatment room of the Interspecies Empathic Healing Center, watching a scene that would have been impossible to imagine when she'd first met. Zen, a human massage therapist, was working with a Velthari client while a Zephyrian bodywork specialist observed and took notes. In the next room, a crystalline being was teaching meditation techniques to a mixed group of human and alien practitioners. The center had become more than just a treatment facility. It was a living laboratory for developing healing approaches that honored the unique abilities and needs of different species while creating genuine therapeutic connection. The latest outcome data is remarkable, Dr. Martinez told Rachel as they reviewed the 6-month results. Client satisfaction rates of 94%, symptom improvement averaging 78%, and most importantly, sustained improvements in quality of life measures. What does Dr. Velmiron think of the psychological assessments? They're writing a paper for the Velthari Medical Journal titled Connection as Medicine, revising assumptions about empathic healing. It's going to fundamentally change how their species approaches trauma treatment. Rachel looked through the window at Zen, who was leading a training session for new practitioners. The transformation in them over the past year had been remarkable, from someone who avoided touch entirely to becoming one of the most skilled empathic healing facilitators in the galaxy. Rachel, Zen called, noticing her in the doorway. Could you demonstrate the integration technique we discussed? Rachel joined the training group, which included practitioners from 7 different species. As she demonstrated how to work with empathic feedback to enhance healing precision, she realized that what had started as one alien seeking relief from chronic pain had evolved into a new understanding of what healing could be. The key principle, Rachel explained to the trainees, is that each being's unique abilities are resources for healing rather than complications to be managed. Empathic sensitivity, enhanced sensory perception, telepathic connection, these aren't problems to overcome, but gifts to be skillfully utilized. A young human therapist raised her hand. But how do you maintain professional boundaries when working with telepathic or empathic clients? You don't maintain boundaries by creating walls, Rachel replied. You maintain them by being clear about intention and conscious about the quality of connection you're creating. When clients can sense that your focus is genuinely on their well-being, it creates safety rather than invasion. After the training session, Rachel found herself in conversation with Dr. Kethera, a Velthari researcher who had come to study their methods. Dr. Brown, what you have accomplished here challenges fundamental assumptions that my species has held for millennia. How so? We have always believed that psychological strength required emotional isolation, but your work demonstrates that strength can be enhanced through skillful connection. What will that mean for Velthari medical practice? It means acknowledging that many of our people have suffered unnecessarily because we were afraid of the very connections that could have healed them. Dr. Kethera paused, then continued with something approaching reverence. You have given my species permission to be empathic beings in a universe that told us our empathy was dangerous. That evening, Rachel received a communication that brought the full impact of their work into focus. It was from the Galactic Health Council, officially recognizing empathic healing as a legitimate medical specialty and requesting that the Interspecies Empathic Healing Center develop training standards for practitioners throughout the galaxy. We're going to be training healers for dozens of species, Rachel told Zen as they reviewed the communication, teaching them to work with abilities that their own medical systems have often seen as complications. It makes sense, Zen replied. What we've learned is that healing happens most effectively when we work with natural abilities rather than against them. And what we've proven is that connection doesn't have to mean loss of self. It can mean finding yourself through relationship with others. 6 months later, the center's influence had spread to healing facilities on 17 different worlds. Rachel found herself traveling throughout the galaxy, teaching practitioners how to develop empathic healing skills and adapt the techniques for their species. Unique physiology and cultural contexts. But the most meaningful moment came during a visit to Velthari Prime, where she was invited to address the Planetary Medical Council. Standing before hundreds of Velthari healers, Rachel spoke about the journey that had brought them to this point. 18 months ago, One member of your species took a tremendous risk, Rachel said. Zen chose to trust that healing was possible, even when everything in their cultural experience suggested that the approach they needed was dangerous. She looked out at the assembled healers, many of whom were experiencing their first exposure to empathic healing concepts. What Zen taught me is that healing isn't about overcoming our natural abilities. It's about discovering how those abilities can serve connection, growth, and well-being. Your empathic sensitivity isn't a weakness to be managed. It's a superpower that can transform how healing happens. The response was profound. Within months, Velthari healing centers throughout the galaxy were implementing empathic healing protocols. Trauma that had been considered untreatable was being successfully addressed. Individuals who had spent decades in isolation were rediscovering their capacity for healthy connection. As Rachel returned to Earth, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A simple massage session had evolved into a galactic transformation of how trauma was understood and treated. But more than that, it had demonstrated that the qualities that make beings different from each other, empathic sensitivity, telepathic connection, enhanced sensory perception, could be sources of healing rather than sources of isolation. You know what I think the most important thing is? Rachel said to Zen as they watched the latest group of trainees practice empathic healing techniques. What's that? We proved that nobody has to carry their pain alone. Whatever abilities someone has, whatever species they belong to, whatever trauma they've experienced, there are ways for connection to enhance healing rather than complicate it. Zen smiled, their ocean-colored eyes bright with the joy they'd rediscovered through healing. And we proved that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply trust that healing is possible. Looking around the treatment center, filled with beings from dozens of species, learning to use their unique abilities in service of healing, Rachel realized they had accomplished something that went far beyond treating chronic pain. They had created a new understanding of what it meant to heal, not as isolated individuals transcending their limitations, but as connected beings discovering their possibilities through relationship with others. The universe, it turned out, was a much more healing place when everyone was allowed to bring their whole selves to the process of getting better.